Well, hello and welcome back to Therapy Wise, everyone. I have a very special guest today, my friend Kate David, who is a wonderful landscape designer and owns a boutique container design company called Hello Garden. Welcome, Kate.
Hello. Thank you for having me, friend.
Yes, when I was introducing you, I'm like, this is such a small piece of who you are. I'm trying to summarize
Yeah.
the complexity of this wonderful person I have in front of me. So I would love for you to tell the listeners a little bit more about you, like, of course, about Hello Garden and some more about you and who you are, because there's so many facets.
Mm, that's such a good question because I feel like when we go through this world, I jokingly refer to a lot of things as like meat suit Kate. There's like meat suit Kate and then authentic, like true Kate.
Yeah.
And and I think that, I mean, you're just like such a beautiful example of that. You were a psychiatrist for a long time. That's like what the outer world recognizes as like who Jenny is. And so meet Suit Kate, I am recognized for my landscape design. I'm recognized for a large portion of my business is container design, where I bring seasonal containers to private homes, businesses throughout the greater Northwest, Seattle and the East Side. Uh, but in terms of like who I am, that's just like the channel in which I come out. I would always qualify myself as a lifelong learner, a lifelong seeker. I consider myself a deeply spiritual person, um, and just someone who's constantly striving to be the most authentic, real version of me as humanly possible.
And I feel like you achieve that so well. Like from the moment that I met you, I felt like that is what you emanate is just who you really are. And when I met you, you were going through a very wild evolution and a lot of change and shift in yourself personally. And,
Mm.
you know, you were going through a lot of change in your and it was happening in your dream life. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about you and dreams?
Oh my gosh. Me and dreams. Okay. Oh, so funny. I actually thought you were going to ask me something different than dreaming. Uh, when we first met, as like a lifelong seeker and spiritual person, I think you run an arc. There's like a natural course that you take. Maybe you explore some of like the traditional elements. Maybe you explore some of the non-traditional elements. And then at a certain point, you realize, "Oh, okay, actually maybe I hold a lot of the answers that I'm seeking."
Yeah.
And when we met, I was on a very kind of wild ride. I've been deep into my own personal development for a very long time, and I've run the typical stuff like Tony Robbins and all like the grand poobahs of personal development. And then it just started leaning a little bit more and more and more spiritual. It was like a slippery slope. And the point at which you and I connected, I'd had a I'd had a spontaneous kundalini awakening.
Yeah.
And it's not something I even knew what was happening when I went through it. It was only in retrospect that I discovered what it was, and it catalyzed for me many things that were always there, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about spiritual work, it's really just like strip down, strip down, strip down, strip down. And then when you think you get to the bottom, you're like, "Nope," we dive in again and again and again. And so with that awakening, it also kicked my dream time into high gear.
Yeah.
And so I've always been a dreamer, um, what I call a dreamer. Um, oh gosh, how to put it into a little bucket here. I've always had really vivid dreams. I've always woken up with a knowing that like there's just work being done while I'm asleep. And what's so funny is when we met, I was in this weird little pocket where my dreams just took off. Like every night it was I almost would wake up in the morning and I would feel exhausted
Yeah.
from the work that I was doing. And then like plants started coming to me like in my dream, which is, a real let's just be honest. That's a pretty wackadoodle thing to say. Um
You had some trippy stuff going on, Kate.
yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, it was like this as these plants were coming to me, like one of the first ones that came to me was Ribes sanguineum, which is a native here. And it was actually like a plant that I really love. And it was one that I was planning to put in the display garden for the show I was designing. And an iris came to me. And when I started looking at the symbols of these things, it was really like it was really interesting. Not only was I designing with these things, but then that I realized that there was this whole language of plants that was also speaking to me of kind of like, I guess it just doubled down a lot of things that I already knew.
Yeah.
When I go in and I design a garden, it is never really about making something pretty. It just never is. Um, the work that I've found that I'm actually doing is what I jokingly call plant tinder. Where essentially like
So funny.
I meet someone, I get a feel for who they are, who is their family, what energy do they have, how do they want to exist in their space, what are they rubbing up against, like what is a friction point for them, and then from that first interaction, basically plants kind of start popping into my head, and I will go through a laundry list of like this is your plant, this is not your plant, and I don't quite know how to explain it other than people have a vibration, plants have a vibration, and the earth that it's going to be planted in has a vibration. And if we don't make that little triangle, we're not getting a good garden. But I couldn't even verbalize that until maybe about 2 years ago. I just thought I was real good at reading people.
Yeah. Well,
I just
that's
thought I was,
it's
I'd,
essentially part of what it is, right? You're reading
yeah.
into their frequency and matching them with the plant well, a variety of plants in a beautiful design. And my question for you is, are people like, what WTF are you asking me? I thought we were talking about plants, or do you kind of pre-warn them, hey, I go deep, before you
Oh,
have the first meeting.
I'm like a Trojan horse, man. I like they don't even know. They don't even know. It all comes off light and fluffy, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like, you know, I think the questions that really raise eyebrows is I'm like, well, how do you want to feel back here? Like if we're in a backyard, I'm like, how do you want to feel back here? And they're like, we don't know. And I was like, well, do you want it to feel like playful? Like, who do you want to be? Like, who do you want in your backyard? Right? Do you want to throw parties back here? Do you want to invite family over? Do you want it to be like a safe little sacred space just for you? Like, what sounds good? What hits that center point for you? And they're like, oh, actually, we have this amazing game room in our basement that opens out onto the garden, and we never have people back here, but literally we want those two spaces to speak to each other. And I'm like, you want to have a good time in your backyard. So like, let's go. Let's
Yeah.
create a good time back here. So most of my clients, I would say 95% of my clients, uh, I don't outrightly communicate what I'm doing
Okay.
because
Yeah. So,
I don't even think I know what I'm really doing.
yeah, some things are so hard to quantify and verbalize. So you're doing it, but it's at
Yeah.
a deep, innate level.
Yeah, I do actually have two clients who are related. And I was talking to the mom, And she's like, "Well, why can my daughter-in-law have this plant at her house? I really love it. I want it at my house." And I told her, I said, "Well, uh, do you want my honest truth about it?" And she's like, "Yeah, I love this olive tree. Why can't I have this at my house?" And I said, "It doesn't speak to to your garden. It may speak to you, but it doesn't speak to your garden and where you live. And so if I were to drop this little olive tree down in your garden in a pot, it would be pretty, but it wouldn't speak the same language as everyone else that's already in your garden." And she was like, "Oh." And I said, "But at your daughter-in-law's house, that olive tree is going to have an awesome party because it's talking to all their little buddies there and it fits." And she's like, "Well, I don't really understand that, but okay." But that's so much of it is like there's like again that triangle. It's like you can have these plants that, you know, I talk to a lot of clients and they'll be like, "Oh, I love this plant." And I love that plant too, but it doesn't match the triangle. It's not their plant. Does that make sense?
It totally does. It's so funny you're saying this because I was just speaking to someone the other day and I said, I really feel like I could be, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing, I could be a matchmaker, and I
Mhm.
I love matchmaking because it's an energetic thing. Well,
Yes.
I know that you don't think that you really are attracted to this person, but you guys would totally vibe. And I used to do a lot of psychological assessments and I would match the client to, like, I just did the assessment and the therapy would be done by a different psychologist. And I would match the psychologist to the client, and I was just a master at that. I loved it because it was like, "Ooh, this person really speaks to this person," and it's one of my favorite things to do, and it's you're speaking to, your version of that matchmaking.
Yeah, I that's literally why I jokingly call it plant Tinder, because I just go through my Rolodex and we can swipe right or swipe left. And at the end of the day, we're gonna come up with a nice little selection of suitors here that are primed and ready for your garden and would make like a little community. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so funny because even looking at the people aren't going to be able to obviously see this, but even looking at the plant in the background, it's mimicking the waves of your hair. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but
No,
it's
I
literally
haven't.
the plant is literally mimicking the waves of your hair.
It's
And
very
I'm like, that's your plant. There she is. You
mhm,
know, this is just an extreme example because it's visually mimicking you. But
right.
yeah,
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so you mentioned your Kundalini awakening. You know,
yeah.
looking back now, so I knew you in the throes of the intensity of this awakening. Like, looking back now, what are some of the lessons that you were learning as it was going on, especially in the early days? And, what kind of advice would you give to someone who might be experiencing something similar? And perhaps we should, maybe tell people what a Kundalini awakening is in case they're not familiar.
Mm. I am I don't even quite know how to describe a Kundalini awakening. Um, So you can Google a description of a Kundalini awakening, but essentially it's like the uncoiling of like the serpent energy. And mine happened spontaneously. There's actually like Kundalini yoga. There are people who like chase the Kundalini awakening, which I'm like, I I I disagree. I
Yeah,
disagree.
I have a belief that, the people who are not chasing it, who are quietly doing their spiritual work, you know,
Yeah.
day after day after day, year after year. So you call it spontaneous. Well, it was years in the making, really.
Yeah, that
It
is actually very
happened.
fair. Thank you.
Yeah. It just
Yeah.
happened sort of suddenly. You had a very sudden and kind of abrupt
It
shift.
was a very yeah, it was a very sudden onset, and essentially, like, I felt just a wave of energy move up my spine, up into the back of my head, and then wrap around and meet in the front of my face, And at the same time, I had this vision of like essentially what I was doing here and how I was guiding people. And it happened in conversation with the mentor I was working with at the time. And what happened kind of after that was it felt as if someone had taken the blinders off.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, it felt like all of the, and not to say it was complete, but so many of the things that I thought about society, my pathway, um, what my next steps were going to be, all of a sudden that just kind of got thrown out the window. And I became almost like just eyes wide to a myriad of possibilities. And also knowing that simultaneously none of them could happen and all of them could happen, I
Right.
think is the best way
Yeah.
to
It's
kind of
very
describe it.
disorienting, it's a beautiful thing, but also a very disorienting thing to experience, especially in the intensity that you experienced it.
Yeah, I really, like, was not prepared, I was not looking for it, I didn't and so, yeah, it really caught me off guard, but at the same time, it threw me down this path of, like, being wildly curious, even more so than I naturally am. Um, and it also I think it, like, just amped up my sensitivity, you know? And I sit here from this perspective of, like, after it happened, I was on, like I was trying to find a podcast talking about it, I was trying to find a YouTube video talking about it, and all of them were so, like, airy-fairy, esoteric, like, I couldn't even relate to any of it. All I knew is that the description fit. What was happening happened, and all of a sudden, I am left with 8,000 more questions than I had 10 minutes ago,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So, is there anything that you felt that you did that was really helpful during that time?
Actually, yeah, I journaled a lot,
Mhm.
I was up at, like, 2 o'clock in the morning journaling about my thoughts and what I felt like what this next chapter, because it really felt so sudden, it felt like yesterday, like, one minute I'm this person, and the next minute, all of that all of the preconceived notions of who I was, like, everything that I thought I was fell away, and I was just more authentically who I am. And
Mhm.
so in that moment, yeah, I remember being up at, like, 2 o'clock in the morning journaling,
Yeah.
and then up at 5 o'clock because I just couldn't even sleep. I had so much energy in my body, and I was in my kitchen literally I was like, "Well, I guess I'm up now. I guess this my day is beginning." And I just, like, made a cup of coffee, and I was doing yoga poses in my kitchen, like, just stretching my body, like, just trying to be I don't even know why I was doing it. It just felt so good to stretch and be limber and be in my body and be moving,
Yeah, I
which is
think
so
that's a really
interesting.
common thing with Kundalini awakenings. Of course, the insomnia, the energy, but also spontaneous desires to do certain movements. That's a really common outcome.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this, but, like, for the listeners out there, mind you, I have not practiced yoga in, like, 20 years. So for me to be spontaneously doing yoga poses in my kitchen, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I think I've fully lost it this time.
Well,
This
and
is it. They're hauling me off to the nut house."
I think one of the hardest things about a Kundalini awakening too is, your regular life continues, right? Like running a
Yes.
company, you have 3 children, you're a single parent. You had a lot of things to do. You didn't really have the time necessarily to be up at 2 a.m. and then again at 5 a.m., repeatedly, right? And that was probably a
Yeah.
really challenging aspect of it.
I would say so, and I think that touches on such a a really key kind of piece for me in everything that I do is, yes, I can be over here working on my own spiritual development and, becoming the most authentic person humanly possible. But at the end of the day, I get the kids up at 6:45 and we do breakfast, and then I have one that goes to elementary school, the next one catches the bus to middle school, and then I drive my high schooler, and you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, I can have these, but like also I'm deeply grounded in the fact that every day I get up and I mother and I do the lunches and all of the things, right? Um, so the balance is always tricky. And I
Mhm.
don't know that I'm a master at it. I just know that I can't shut off either. And so they must exist. So therefore, why even try to keep them separate?
Yeah,
We're just all part of the same life experience.
yeah. You're exceptionally good at it, and also no one is perfect at it, and,
Yeah.
the show must go on, right? So, how do you think these experiences have impacted your style of parenting?
Mm. Well, I think a couple different things. I think it makes me look at my children differently. I think in Western culture, I can only speak to Western culture because I've never grown up in any other part of the world, but there's a certain weird ownership that is placed upon children. Like you belong to your parents legally until you're 18, unless you're emancipated. Obviously there's exceptions to all of this. I'm just speaking from like a very sociotypical perspective, but there's a weird sense of ownership. These are my children. These are my offspring. But I think what all of this has done is it's shifted the lens, my parenting lens, and saying, I gave birth to these children. I was lucky enough to give birth to these children, but they are in their own right on their own journey. And as much as I want to soften maybe mistakes that they made, or, someone got a bad grade on a test, or someone is having an argument with their friend, I do have to step back and start allowing them to make their own decisions and respect the autonomy of their journey. Now, it's not to say I'm a hands-off parent because that's totally not the case, and I still have human impulses, but I think that my journey is informing how I look at my children as spiritual beings
Yeah,
having a human experience.
that's beautiful. And I love how, you have 3 boys, and they're all very different people.
Wildly different.
And they all, if anyone follows human design, they all are different designs. And
Yes.
are they all different from you as well? Like, are you
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so,
Yeah.
like, that just the likelihood of that, the probability of that is so slim that you would have a family that is all a different profile in human design like that. I'm sure you're one of very few families that has that dynamic. So I think that even amplifies what you just said.
Very much so. I also think that okay, I'm gonna give you a vacation example. So for those of you who know human design, I'm a generator. I keep on going. I just truck right along.
Same.
And then I have a manifester, I have a projector, and I have a reflector.
Yeah, and reflectors are like super rare.
They're super rare. They're super rare. And if we were to all go on vacation, all 4 of us would have a different vacation experience. And in fact, after learning how to just the basics of their human design, we did take a road trip. And because I'm a generator, I want to get up, I want to go, I want to do all the things, like let's plan a schedule, and but also leave room to go with the flow because that's also in my energy is I like to have surprises and be able to say yes. But I have 3 children with super inconsistent energy. So as much as I want to go, 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 I also schedule time where you know what? Say we're gonna leave the amusement park at 5 o'clock and not shut it down at 7. I need to understand that it's actually in my children's best interests to say when they're done and then honor that, as opposed to be like, nope, we paid for these tickets. We're going to close down the park, da 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 da. Um, Another kind of piece of that is allowing time for them when they start their day to start their day as individual as they are.
Mm,
So, or when they're tired, it's like, we were going and my oldest was like, I'm just not into this. I just want to go sit on this like chair over here and just chill for an hour. And he's 15. He can do that. And he needs that.
yeah.
He needs that downtime because if I were to keep pushing him, I would also end up in a parenting nightmare of a stressed out person who their energy has just been run to the limit and then pushed beyond.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
end up better for it. Do you know what I mean?
It's so true. And I have 2 kids, and it's like that morning example is so, so relevant to us that my older one is not a morning person, does not like
Mhm.
getting up, has a hard time getting ready on time. My younger one is like bounces out of bed, hours before they need to, gets himself totally ready, walks to school. And my older one, I'm like dragging them along. I drive them to school every day, even though they're going to the same school. They both could,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
older one just needs more help in the morning. And, so I try to do the best that I can to just I could say like, "Get out of bed, let's go," "Your younger sibling is able to do this." But I know that's just, that's not helpful to anybody. And later on in the day, they're much more functional. They're just not a morning person.
Totally. I think another really good example of that is um my oldest is a manifester. And when he was starting high school, it was really fun the first 2 weeks because he taught himself how to take the bus all the way there. And then he figured out how to get there on his bike and tried 2 different routes. One had, like, a slow incline on the hill, the other one had, like, a sharp uphill, and then it was more flat. So he tried that. And then he was like, "Well, I think I'm gonna bum a ride with, the kid who lives down the street today." And so, as that manifestor, he's gotta try all these different things to figure out what sings his song, and then also he gets to decide like, "Oh, I'm gonna sleep in a little bit this day, so could you give me a ride?" Or, "I've decided I wanna get up early and I wanna bike to school. My buddy around the corner is gonna take the bus, so we're gonna ride." Do you know what I mean? So it's like giving him the flexibility to decide how he wants to get to school is actually super empowering for him, and I feel kind of tickled that he's found all these ways for himself, and by me taking my hands off the wheel and just being like, "You need to get to school at this time. Pick your avenue." And it's like he's doing it. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. And like I love how you're just giving him the opportunity to have that growth.
Yeah. And I also wanna, like, say this with the caveat that I am still, like, teeth clenched in the background, like, "Oh god, is, like, are my children gonna launch?" I think every parent has that. And so, I think I just wanna, like, circle back to the concept that it's both and. It is like, I'm fighting my human urges and also honoring their own life experience and their own spiritual journey. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Totally. I tend to err on the side, like, I focus on what is really important for my kids to learn and know, and especially as they get older, I'm always just trying to teach them how to make good choices, that align with
Mhm.
them. And because I'm not gonna be there most of the time now, I already feel it even with my 11-year-old. She's around, other people most of the time, not me. And so teaching them, good values and decision making is the most important thing, and I give them a lot of freedom to mess up. And I often think like, "Oh man, if I was just a bit more controlling, life would be quite a bit
Man.
easier right now." But I know that that's long term not the best for them.
It's so painful. It's so painful to watch the mess ups. Um, but I think also you can take a look at that and be like, I was a kid who strove for perfection all the time, and that was an internal job, right? And in a way, it served me well, but I think you end up with your own unique life journey, and they're just on a different trajectory, and they're feeling very free to, like, make the mistakes and figure it out, you know and it's interesting. I'm waiting for them to kind of, like, I don't even know how to describe it, but their little bits of personality are coming out in the choices that they're making, and I can only control it so far. So, the best I can do is be a good example, give them some guideposts, give them the low-hanging fruit to make those, like, smaller decisions, and then their decisions could get a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger. So I think as a parent also, I feel like it's a process of figuring out, like, okay, is this an opportunity where I can say yes to it not turning out how I envision it would be
Mhm.
because
Totally.
I have my own sense of perfection that I'm always struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. So, going back to your work life, I know that you are prepping for a big show. I would love for you to tell me a little bit about that and how that, how your preparation for this and how your creativity for it is serving you.
Mm. Okay, so yeah, I am prepping for the Northwest Flower and Garden Show. So this is a very large garden show. It's the second largest in the nation, right behind the Philadelphia Garden Show, and it happens in February. And the first and to give some backstory to this, I've been going to this show since I was in my 20s. And when I was in my 20s, I remember walking into that show and just thinking to myself, what a dream it would be to exhibit at this show one
Mhm.
day. And it's multiple days. It runs Wednesday through Sunday. There's speakers going all around the clock. And then when you walk in, there are these amazing display gardens. And so essentially, we've taken the convention center and we have 3 days to construct a full size garden in the middle of the convention center.
Oh my gosh.
It's insane. It's
Wow.
crazy. Um, I actually filmed it and I put it up on YouTube just because I thought it was, like, so fun to see. And last year, really, I felt like it was my first time doing the show, and I wanted to introduce myself to people. So I wanted to create a garden that would say, "Hey, this is who I am. It's a little Mad Hatter. It's super creative. It's a good time. Like, how's it going?" And so it became this just super personal garden where I put in photos of, me and my dad planting a cherry tree when I
Mm.
was little. Also my mom's typewriter from college. Like I snuck little nuggets of who I am as a person into that garden. So what's interesting is this year I'm doing something really different.
Mm.
And the vision for it actually came to me during the show. And if anyone has ever been in through the Seattle area, we have beautiful islands off of our, out in the sound. And two of my favorite islands are Whidbey Island and Bay Bridge Island. And I actually spent a lot of time on Whidbey as a kid, running through the forest and really the smell of sword ferns and the smell of like the forest is something that speaks directly to my soul. And so what I decided to do for this year is I want to create a gift for people. So last year was all about me. This year it's going to be all about the people who are coming to the show. And I'm presenting a concept that I am calling forest bathing.
Oh.
And forest bathing is all about the ways that I find healing that I want to share with people. And normally, all of these display gardens, you would be able to, like, walk around the perimeter and you see into them, and there's, like, great little, nuggets for you to find and very, very fun. I am going to flip the script. I don't know how it's gonna be received by the judges. I kind of don't care.
Love that.
Like, I didn't care going into it last year. I just wanted to tell people who I was, and I ended up winning a gold award for it. Like, it was
Amazing.
amazing.
Yes.
And this year, I'm going at it again, and I'm like, I'm not even gonna look at the judging criteria. I don't care. I just want to deliver something beautiful for people to experience. So, what I will be creating is an immersive garden. Instead of you walking around the exterior and looking at it, I'm going to create a walking path directly through my garden. And
Wow.
I'm going to have the garden come up around. Um, and I actually am going to be surrounding the perimeter with huge trees.
Oh my goodness.
So when you walk into the pathway, into the middle of the garden, I want it I want the showgoers to experience what it's like to be in the middle of the big city and have it fall away. And for a moment, they are in my memories of growing up on the island, running around in the forest, but of course, like, also make it floral because I'm a floral junkie, and I want them to just for a minute walk into this little ecosystem that I'm creating and take a deep breath and just
Beautiful.
and just be.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
you're making me want to go down to Seattle. It's really not too far
It's not too far.
where I'm at. I was actually we were playing a lot of Trivial Pursuit over the holidays. We tend to play that as a family fairly often over Christmas, and I realized, okay, my geography could use a little brushing up, not my
Mhm.
strength. So I've been really looking at maps more often. So I thought, I'm going to look at Seattle on a map. I didn't realize how many islands there are and how much water and like, you know,
Yeah.
I hadn't looked at Seattle closely on a map before. It looks like just such a beautiful and interesting place to live.
I do feel like I live in one of the most beautiful environments in the entire world. It's really incredible. I
Yeah.
love that I can so part of my preparation for this show, I will tell you, is, a couple years ago, I would be designing, and I would really just try to plow through a design. Like, I would get to a sticking point, and I'd be like, "Nope, we push through." And then I sat down one day, and I was like, oh, no, actually, this is when we stop."
Mm,
And so when we talk about getting ready for the show, something that I bring in is when I get to a design point where I feel stuck, I will actually get up, go sit on my couch, and meditate for 20 minutes.
I love that. You know, it's just such a testament to just unlearning our societal tendency to push through every single time we get tired or we don't want to do something. Sometimes those stuck points are meant to be a moment of shift and change, and you're really taking it as, okay, I'm not meant to continue pushing through. I'm meant to receive inspiration. I'm meant to rest my body and my mind and then
Yeah.
wherever it takes me.
Another thing that I'll do sometimes also is if I'm deciding between 2 plants, during that meditation, I'll sit there and I'll walk through the garden 3 years into the future, and I will walk through it once with one plant selection, and then I'll walk through it a second time with the other plant selection. And at the end of that, like, self-guided meditation, I'll be like, "That one felt better." That it's all about gut, it's all about feeling.
Yeah.
And so why would I ever choose the cerebral choice when a garden is evocative and is meant to be sensed and felt in all of its glory? So
Yeah.
I it's like it's just such a great affirmation. And so in getting ready for the show, it's been super fun because I went to go visit my brother and his husband on Bainbridge Island and walked around there, like, beautiful acreage that's just forested and just it's just yummy, just
Mm,
awesome. And then I went over to Discovery Park in Seattle and walked the Loop Trail, and it's ghostly in winter, and there's all this beautiful skeletal structure, and I just let myself breathe in that air and just be in that natural environment. Because the other concept that I'm playing with right now to bring through as I fine tune those details is I wanna bring in some natives, which people I feel like have a love or hate relationship with. I mean, I think everyone loves a native, but they're seen as like not elevated. They're
Mhm.
not like what you would put in a super fancy formal garden.
Yeah,
And so I'm just sitting here thinking, well, shoot, I wonder if I could make a native kind of sexy.
I love that.
So
And
that's another idea. That was one of the things that came to me in that walk through Discovery Park, because I was like, this is, some people may think that this is winter and barren and da 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 da. I was like, but it is kind of sexy. It's
yeah,
also kind of amazing. So could I flip the script? Could
yeah,
I like lure people to the dark side of like looking at things from a new perspective?
yeah, and the natives thrive, right, in the
Yeah.
climate and in the area. And that, like, there's such beauty in that, that they move with the cycles and the seasons. Whereas, if we
Yeah.
bring in, let's say, a bonsai tree from Japan, it's gonna require a lot of TLC, even just to allow it to continue to live.
Yeah. Or, some of these more like, everyone's super into houseplants. Well, if you throw a houseplant outside, it's going to live maybe this summer and then it's going to die a horrible death. So, but I think where people get taking like the common Western sword fern, for example, you cannot like shake a stick without hitting a sword fern around these neck of the woods. And so it's almost like people are dismissive of it.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
when you see something so commonly, then the nature is to kind of dismiss it for the bright and shiny object, the new variety, the new da 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 that's been grown by this grower. Well, like, what if just the old standbys are also bright and shiny? We just forgot how shiny they were.
totally. It's like when people come to a different country and they're like, "Oh my god, like it's a fox." And it's like, "Okay, well, we see foxes all the time here." Like, it's just not exciting, right? But
Yeah.
someone else, it's like, "This is really exciting." And we get, just immune to the beauty that's all around
Yeah.
us. So it sounds like that's really what you're trying to point out to people, and I love that message.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, oh, we've touched on so many beautiful things. I would love to hear, I know you're a voracious learner and reader. What have you been reading lately?
I am always reading. I have stacks and stacks of books all over my house. I honestly do, and I feel like my reading is in an oh my gosh, I feel like I have different categories that I read. So I have, the things that I read for fun, like sometimes just some good trashy fiction. Like, it doesn't even have to be elevated. I'm
Mm,
not out here in the streets saying I'm a scholar. Like sometimes you just want something that tells you a good story and takes your mind away. But something I commonly do is I always have some sort of landscape book. Right now, one that I am revisiting because I don't ever just read a landscaping book once. I'll go back to it time and time and time again. In fact, if I ever get stuck, sometimes I'll also go and I'll sit and I'll just thumb through a giant stack of books and
mhm,
I'll just kind of drink in inspiration from others. So I'm reading one called Wild, and it's called The Naturalistic Garden. And the reason that I reached for it is because it's actually photographed by one of my favorite landscape photographers. Her name is Claire Takacs, Takacs. And her photography, I don't know how she creates emotion in a landscape, but she's just exceptional at it. And
mm,
so, in kind of this wild approach, I'm revisiting this book just to see what other people are doing and just to get a little bit of inspiration. And then the other one is kind of a silly one. I think right around the time that we met, I started to reread the books that I was attracted to as a child. Did we ever talk about this?
I don't recall us talking about this.
Okay, so I went through this phase that is still continuing where I kind of am asking myself, when we're younger, like there's this authentic part of us that hasn't been dampened by like taxes, jobs, moving, da 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 da. And so I'm like, well, what did that little girl love? Like, what was she super into? And I reread, funny enough, it was a lot of like wolf books. I don't know what that's about.
Interesting. I'm sure that has
Yeah.
a sort of deeper meaning.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. When I figure it out, I will let you know. But books that I really loved as a child, one of them was Julie of the Wolves, Call of the Wild. God, I loved that one. And both of them are really about this return to the natural, right? But another thing that I really loved was I had this pop-up gnome book as a child, like garden gnomes.
Yeah.
And the artist just put out basically like an updated version, and I bought it.
Oh my gosh. I love that.
It is they are like the best illustrations in the whole wide world. It brings me right back to when I was a little girl and dreaming and thumbing through this book. And it's basically this huge anthology of like everything that is known about gnomes. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing. And it's written by, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, Will with one L, and his last name is Huygen. And I just bought it because I felt this deep kind of urge to do another round of remembering of who I was as a kid. So this has been added, and it's just one of those daydreamy books that brings me out of my serious world and back into fantasy because I think there's so much richness in imagination, and everything I do is first conceived in the imagination. So I
Yeah.
might as well just keep it alive, just keep cooking after it.
You're such a creative person. And I think creative people, they're so attached to imagination in a positive way, right? Like that is just
Yeah.
part of the fabric of who you are. And it obviously was as a child. Like it sounds like you had a lot of wonder and awe and you
Yeah.
allowed yourself to explore. And that has shaped you into who you are.
Yeah, and I think also going back to that concept of wonder and awe, my first garden was actually planted outside my bedroom window.
Mm,
My dad ripped out this old tree, and I really wanted a flower garden. And so my parents just let me pick out seeds and plant whatever I wanted. And I remember the first time the fall came around and seed heads were coming out, and I had poppies and violas and bachelor buttons and all these other kind of wildflowers growing. I started to realize that they all contained seeds. And so I started tracking the colors of blooms, and then saving all the seeds in little envelopes, thinking, like, well, I bought seeds and these ones are free. And I can write down, okay, this flower is this color. I wonder if I plant that, if it'll come up the same color as what I'm documenting. And so literally, I can look back and look at, 11-year-old me, 12-year-old me planting in a garden and saving seeds, and just know that what I do now is so inherently me. No
yeah.
one taught me how to save seeds. No one taught me necessarily how to plant seeds. Yet all of my earliest memories are of doing just that in the garden,
Yeah.
you know?
Isn't that incredible? I
Like I
love
grew vegetables with my mom, and but growing flowers was something that I did very fully on my own. Um and I can now look back at that and be like, "Oh, that's authentic me." And
I love
so
flower growing too. It's like so just for beauty. Like it's just for pure pleasure.
oh, doesn't it feel luxurious? Like, just to grow a flower just because it's pretty.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that is like the ultimate luxury, just to do something because it's beautiful. But I also have I mean, we could probably speak another hour about beauty, because I think that while we can think of it as this frivolous thing, beauty is so necessary. It is so life-giving in this world.
Yeah. Beauty is such an important aspect of spirituality. And I think people often don't realize that. That
Mm.
is part of why the world looks the way it looks, and nature is the most incredible example of that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, yeah, I do have so many deep thoughts about beauty, and I actually used to be a bit sheepish about what I did because I felt like I needed to do something that would change the world more.
Mhm.
I felt like I grew up doing a lot of community service, and I loved it because I felt like I was making this world better. And so as a landscape designer, I was like, "Oh, I'm working for just a handful of people and I'm making things pretty, or I'm planting a container that is literally just for beauty.
Mhm.
It doesn't serve a purpose other than to be beautiful." But what I realized is that in the act of doing that, I am planting I've planted more trees than anyone I know, which are literally making this world a better place.
Well, I spent
And
all summer tree planting, Kate, so maybe
oh,
still
challenge,
still I feel
challenge.
like you have me beat. I wasn't really very good at it, but
But, and then planting a container of flowers just to be pretty. Well, what I failed to realize is that by bringing that beauty into the world, I am making people smile. I
Mm,
am brightening people's day. And I will tell you that I will even do container changes in downtown Seattle, which is kind of rough right now. And even those who are unhoused will come up to me and tell me that my containers make a difference
mm,
because they bring beauty to the street. And it wasn't until I started thinking about that, I was like, this unhoused person is their home is the street. And by virtue of me beautifying this street, I'm helping beautify their home,
mhm.
you know?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's pretty wild.
Ah. So, Kate, tell me about your YouTube channel. What is your goal there? Like, what do you do on there?
Mm. So, YouTube and filming these videos and getting them up, turns out it is harder than it looks.
I agree.
Um, but I think, when I this year I'm making a big push to put more content out there. And how this originally started was my partner was, we'd be going out on the weekend to do, XYZ, run errands and all of that. And my phone in the spring is just blowing up right and left. People are sending me a picture of this. How do I prune it? Have you seen this plant before? I really love it. I mean, just nonstop. And he looks at me and he's like, and it was the first year that we were dating. And he's like, "Does this happen all the time?" And I said, "Well, yeah, yeah. Spring mostly, you know, I'll get like 10 text messages a weekend with just like, people want to know information."
Oh, mm,
Yeah. And he's like, "People know there's Google, right?" And I was like, Yeah, but like, it's kind of nice to talk to someone about this stuff and get excited about it." And he's like, "Babe, you need to put this on like a social media platform." And so the idea percolated for a few years, and I just decided, you know what, this is really the year where I'm just going to share. And here's where it compounded also. I felt a deep desire and drive to return to my own garden. I
mm,
spend so many hours working for my beautiful clients that sometimes my garden is left for last.
yeah.
And that is what first sparked that joy and that love. And so this is a way that I get to share in a more personal way. And I get to champion people and show people what I'm excited about and the things that I'm doing and and connect with them as not just like a landscape designer, but as a woman who loves plants and loves to garden. And I really hope that the end result of this channel is creating a community, because I can go and I can, touch maybe like a few dozen, gardens a year, right? But there's a hundreds, thousands, millions of people out there that I also want to impact and that I also want to touch.
Mm,
And so this is a way that I can send a little bit of me out into the ether to connect with others and to create this community of people who just have a love for not only what the garden gives them, but what they give the garden, that like beauty and reciprocity.
Ah, I love that. So what is the YouTube channel called?
So I'm at Hello Garden on YouTube. I'm at Hello Garden Design on Instagram. But if you type in at Hello Garden, I should pop right up, and then you can just kind of see what I'm up to and come along to the Northwest Flower and Garden Show. I'm going to film that again this year because that was so fun. I mean, it's just like a wild ride seeing all of these massive construction vehicles inside a convention center. It's super fun. And then I could just share the things that I'm loving and the joy of what I'm doing and create that connection with people that maybe I wouldn't get to meet in real life.
Totally. I've been watching your front yard project.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's just so beautiful. I love the idea of that. I love the idea of connecting more with neighbors. Like I think where I live anyway, people just drive into their garage and I'm totally, I do it too. We drive in, we go inside and we hang out in our backyards and don't tend to see our neighbors very much. So the front yard is such an untapped resource and I love how you've been focusing on.
Ugh. Yeah, I will tell you that a front yard garden, here's the thing. Someone called me or sent me an email asking me for a comment on trends for 2024. And my number one thing I responded is I feel the front yard garden is a trend for 2024
Mm,
because we have been in backyards, in houses for so many years that when you put a garden in your front yard, I will tell you firsthand, I have never met so many of my neighbors. It's honestly, it feels like I've moved into my garden for the very first time because
wow.
I am out there and I'm connecting with people and people are asking me questions and they're walking by and they're saying, "Oh my gosh, I saw the pergola go up. Oh my gosh, tell me about these green beans that you're growing. What variety did you choose? Is that a cucumber? It looks like a lemon." I mean, the conversations are so beautiful and precious, and the sense of community that has sprung from me literally putting a patio in my front yard, it's been priceless. Highly recommend.
Okay,
5
you
stars.
heard it here first, people. The trend for 2024.
Get out in that front yard. Do it.
Well, Kate, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us. And
Mm,
I will be linking below the podcast episode all the ways that people can get a hold of you.
I've loved being with you, and I just thank you for being this voice out here. I so appreciate it, and it brings me so much joy to hear you out in this world.
Thank you so much.